Okay, this video is another journal club. It's going to be landmark papers for the vegan diet. So the first paper is called Blood Pressure in the African Native, and it's by C.P. Donison, Lancet Journal, 1929. So this is in Kenya. 1,800 consecutive black male adult patients admitted to a hospital. And how many of them do you think had high blood pressure? In the United States, if you admitted 50 adult black males to the hospital, I would predict about 80% of them would be hypertensive. Well, guess what? In Kenya in 1929, 0 had hypertension, where they were eating a predominantly plant-based diet, a low-fat plants. So the incidence of hypertension in a population eating a low-fat plant-based diet is about 0, whereas by 60 years of age, the vast majority of people eating a westernized diet, the SAD diet or some other high-fat version thereof, will have hypertension. I can tell you almost all the patients have the same disease. Most of them are overweight, almost all of them are hypertensive, and most of them are pre-diabetic or diabetic, and almost all of them have coronary artery disease, atherosclerosis, cerebral vascular disease, etc. And then tons of them get cataracts, impotence, spinal degeneration, cerebral atrophy degeneration, and early onset cognitive decline. Okay, so that's the point here. The difference between standard westernized diet, high-fat diets, high animal food diets, high processed food diets, it's not close. It's not 2 to 1 or 5 to 4. It's 100 to 0. And if you don't understand that, 100 to 0, then I can't help you. You shouldn't be watching my channel. That's why all this paleo, keto, carnivore is all nonsense. This is why the high-fat phonies promoting about a 40% of calories from fat. They're full of crap. It's nonsense. You see these guys trying to sell olive oil, omega-6 oils, omega-3 supplements. That's nonsense, okay? Just so you know that. That's why I'm showing you all this. Okay, here's 3 great pioneers of research in diabetes. All of these guys won the Banting Award. This is Michael Brownlee, Banting Award in 2012. This is Roy Taylor, Banting Award in, well, he won in 2004. Roy Taylor, 2012. And Gerald Shulman in 2018. So he showed that fat overwhelms the inner mitochondrial membrane, causing a reversal of electron transport, and that's the main mechanism of insulin resistance. Roy Taylor showed if you catch a type 2 diabetic, less than 4 years of type 2 diabetes, and you get them to lose the weight, the first spot they lose all the fat from is their fatty liver, and then they're cured. Okay? Gerald Shulman showed with nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, the first detectable finding of type 2 diabetes is accumulation of fat in the skeletal muscle cell. Muscle is myo, so it's intramyocellular lipid. Okay? So it's known. There's nothing ambiguous about it. Fat accumulation in skeletal muscle is the primary mechanism of type 2 diabetes. Okay? It's not ambiguous. It's well known. A ton has been studied and written about it. Here's the Brownlee paper. This is the greatest paper ever written in the history of diabetes research, and one of the all-time greatest medical papers ever written. I cried when I read this paper. This is like the Sistine Chapel of medical papers, of scientific research papers. It's so good and it's so beautiful and it's so perfectly done that you're just overwhelmed by how magnificent it is. Michael Brownlee had type 1 diabetes. He was told he's going to be dead in his early 30s, and he's like, well, gee, I hope I live longer than that. He devoted his whole life as a researcher to studying diabetes. The guy's a genius, and he studied it inside out, backwards and forwards, upside down, left and right, top to bottom, in reverse, forward again, every single thing you could think of. He'll show you, here's the mechanism. People say, well, what about this? He goes, well, we check that. What about this? 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 Well, we explained it this way. What about this? We explained it this way. You will have 100 questions in your mind about diabetes, and he'll answer all of them. This paper is so magnificent. Every single medical student should read this. Every single biochemistry, biology, PhD should read this paper. It's that spectacular of a paper. It really is. It's one of the all-time greatest papers I ever read in my whole life. And I can say that's not just my opinion. I know a couple other doctors who had a chance to see it, and they're just like freaked out. They go, this is the most important medical paper ever written. It's that extraordinary. If you see it, you'll want to become a scientist. You'll believe in God. You'll cry. I'm telling you, it's that great of a paper. Okay. Here's another paper about coronary artery disease. Oh, I meant to show the diabetes papers next to this. I'm going to get to them. I got this out of order, so I screwed up. But it'll still make sense. This is a paper from Uganda. In 1960, autopsies of black men in Uganda. 1,427 black men over 40 years of age. And there was not a single fatal heart attack. Not one. There was one heart attack that was not fatal, a small healed one. So 0 death by heart attacks. In the United States, it'd be like 35% of the guys, okay? So it's quite extraordinary. Okay, here's another paper about Uganda. They said in Uganda, coronary artery disease is almost non-existent, okay, whereas it's the most common cause of death here. And they compared the blacks in Uganda to the Asians. When they say Asian, they usually mean people from India, okay? And the Indians, were sort of shipped in, more educated, more wealthy. They're eating higher fat diets, and they had a lot more of the typical Western diseases, where the African population in Uganda of that time were more poor, eating a plant-based diet, and they didn't get any coronary artery disease. And it's the same everywhere you see that. Dr. McDougall noticed the same thing in Hawaii. The manual laborers eating a lot of rice and the old traditional plant-based diets, they didn't get the Western diseases. And the rich people living in the cities, doctors and lawyers and businessmen and other merchants and stuff, they had lots of coronary artery disease, breast cancer, diabetes, obesity, hypertension. The so-called rich foods, the high-fat foods. Okay, now here's what I meant to show a slide ago. This is called the flip-flop maneuver of fatty acids. This is the mechanism by which fatty acids get across the plasma membrane. I knew this had to be there. As soon as I read the Brownlee paper, I'm like, well, how does the fat get into the cell? So I started searching for how does fat get across plasma membranes, and here's what it does. Initially, it'll be deprotonated in the plasma. It becomes protonated, then it can intercalate itself into the outer leaflet of the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane is the outer membrane around every individual cell. And then once it's in the outer leaflet of the plasma membrane, it can flip. That's why it's called the flip-flop maneuver. It can flip-flop into the inner leaflet of the plasma membrane, and then from there it can diffuse into the cytoplasm. Once it's in the cytoplasm, it acidifies the cytoplasm, makes it more acidic. The lowering of the pH inhibits the main glycolysis enzyme for metabolizing glucose, which is called phosphofructokinase. By shutting down phosphofructokinase, that's one mechanism of causing insulin resistance. It will then, though, the fatty acid go into the mitochondria and inhibit intermitochondrial membrane electron transport, and that's the second mechanism. So everything backs up. Electron transport backs up. Krebs cycle backs up, and then glycolysis backs up, and insulin resistance occurs. The cell won't want to take in any more glucose. It basically has what's called overnutrition, and that's type 2 diabetes. And the point of this slide, why did I show you and tell you this is such an important slide? Because there's nothing you could do. The more fat you eat, the more fat gets into the cell, the more type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance you have. Game over. There's no way around that. Because it's not carried by a plasma membrane pump transporter that you could inhibit. It just flip-flops across the membrane. So all you can do is eat less fat or you're screwed. There's no medical, surgical bullshitology that can change that. That's it. That's it. Game over. I mean, that's an important thing. This is academic orgasm. Eureka. And people who've done research on causing insulin resistance in diabetes in animals, they all know that. This is not some mystery. Paleo-keto carnivores just try to pretend they have something to say. Nonsense. And the high-fat phonies promoting a high-fat version of the Mediterranean diet, they're full of BS too. Okay, changes in the internal pH caused by movement of fatty acids in and out of pancreatic beta cells. Okay? And so here's the guy who's done the most research on this, James Hamilton. The results show that fatty acid movement into cells occurs predominantly via passive diffusion, the flip-flop maneuver, of the unionized form traveling across the plasma membrane. And the pH effect can be explained by passive diffusion of unionized fatty acids across the plasma membrane. So the fat comes in, and it's a fatty acid, and it acidifies the cytoplasm. And that inhibits phosphofructokinase, also called PFK. And then glycolysis shuts down, and the cell won't take in any more glucose. Okay. Plus, it's also going to go into the mitochondria and inhibit the mitochondria. So this is just sort of repeating the same thing. Hamilton's paper, about the fat getting into the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, it binds the outer lipid. Some of it's ionized, some of it is not, and then it rapidly flip-flops the unionized portion into the inner leaflet. Then it goes into the plasma membrane and acidifies the cytoplasm. Okay, this is just saying the same thing in the conclusion part of the paper. All right, now here is something mentioning the serum cholesterol diet and coronary heart disease in Africans, Asians, and Ugandans. Okay, actually, this was the same paper. So I really shouldn't have put this here. I was going too fast. Here's McDougall's book, Starch Solution, and McDougall talks about epidemiology in his book, and he basically says, Ever since the beginning of recorded history, all large healthy populations ate a low-fat, starch-based, plant-based diet. There's no exceptions. There's no exceptions. Starch is cheap and it can store a long time. You don't need refrigeration. That makes it wonderful, and it's the healthiest food there is. Okay. All right, here's just some paper. We're not going to spend much time on it. The golden paper, okay, and it just showed that patients eating 2.5% of calories from protein did very well. And the Walter Kempner data shows about the same thing. He was feeding patients not much more than that, I don't know, in the ballpark of about 3%, 3.5% of calories from protein, and the patients did very well. And you know they had adequate protein because they maintained their serum albumin. The serum albumin is the most important plasma protein. So the point of all this is they had positive nitrogen balance despite a minuscule protein intake. You know, breast milk's only 5 to 6% of calories from protein, and that's all you need at the most rapid phase of growth in your life. So the rest of your life, you're not growing that fast, so you don't need that much protein. And you don't even need essential amino acid supplements or, keto acid supplements, okay? So don't get me wrong. There could be, if you start dropping your serum albumin, you might need that, okay? I'm talking like in the context of helping patients with kidney failure by minimizing their dietary nitrogen, but it's still rather extraordinary numbers. Okay, here's the China study, T. Colin Campbell, and he basically showed the more animal protein you eat, the more cancer you get. And this paper right here from T. Colin Campbell also showed that, here, let me get myself out of the way, etiology of coronary artery disease. So Campbell did write a nice paper on coronary arteries, and what he basically showed is where in rural China, people ate far less fat than the United States. Okay, the United States eat 3 times as much fat, and the Chinese ate way more fiber. Okay, and he said basically because of this, the Chinese had an average total cholesterol of 127. In the USA at that time, their average total cholesterol was 203. And that the Americans had 16.7 times greater risk of coronary artery disease. It's obvious, all this high fat stuff is for chumps. So then he lists a table here showing the difference between the diseases of a Western country versus the so-called developing country, really third world countries, okay? You know, everybody's always polite. They're third world, okay? They're technologically, scientifically backward. And what do they get? They get a lot of infections, pneumonias, intestinal parasites, tuberculosis, so mostly infectious diseases. But in the Western world, we're pretty good at preventing infections. So isn't it obvious what you do? Eat the way these third world people do, but keep the benefits of your indoor heating and plumbing, and then you don't get any of this stuff. It's obvious. That's the most intelligent, best thing you could do. And nowadays it's more complicated because there's so much toxic stuff in your tap water and in your food unless you get organic. And even organic's not perfect, but it's the best you can do outside of growing it yourself. But what I'm basically showing you is these are landmark papers showing it's pretty obvious that this is the way to go. And he recommends, T. Colin Campbell, no protein, no animal protein, not one bite. Okay. Nathan Pritikin would say, well, maybe you should eat a little bit of animal protein to get your vitamin B12 source. And I wonder, I haven't answered that question fully. Should you get your B12 from eating a little bit of animal food, or should you get it from, taking one of those supplements? All those supplements are said, according to Anthea Hayes, to contain a little bit of cyanide, even the methylcobalamin she claims. So the cyanocobalamin has the most, so I would never take that. Anyways, let's take a quick look at some epidemiology. Northern Mexico, you have the Tarahumara and the Sierra Madre Mountains. Sierra means like a saw up and down edge of the mountaintops. And it's also called Copper Canyon, this area in northern Mexico. They used to be combined with the Pima population. Mexican-American War, 1848. The Pima are pulled into what is now Arizona. They eat a sad diet, and they're fat and sick, and their health is a disaster, okay? Here's what the Pima used to look like a college wrestling team, a bunch of fit, healthy, strong, energetic, athletic-looking guys. Here's what they look like now. They're all blimped out with all the Western high-fat diseases. So the Tarahumara, who's eating the old-fashioned, corn and beans and local greens diet, they're running over 100 miles in 2 days once a year on some big holiday, versus the Pima. They're fat and sick disaster. Open heart surgery, gallstone surgery, appendicitis, losing their legs for diabetes. They're a disaster. It's pretty obvious. It ain't genetic, it's the diet. Okay, the Tarahumara, they don't even have cars. They run around all the time. So anyways, their diet is mostly local beans and greens and corn. This is just more of the same stuff. They don't have hypertension. They don't have obesity. And the women run about 100 miles in 2 days. I mean, it's extraordinary. Nathan Pritikin patterned himself after them. They eat a tiny amount of meat, a tiny amount of fish, tiny amount of eggs. Okay. Roy Taylor's book, we talked about Roy Taylor's work, that basically if you lose the fat, all his patients who lost 30 pounds or more reversed their type 2 diabetes. And had only had type 2 diabetes less than 4 years, so they still had intact pancreatic beta cells. Here's a famous paper by Caldwell Esselstyn, A Way to Reverse Coronary Artery Disease. Yeah, basically he says that every patient who actually followed his diet never had a recurrent cardiovascular event. In his study of 198 patients, he reported one patient who had like a little stroke, and he says that patient didn't follow the diet. Okay. Here's Caldwell Esselstyn's book, a couple quotes by him. Nitric oxide is the life jacket of your arteries, the most powerful vasodilator in your body. The number one goal for good arterial function is to maintain adequate amounts of nitric oxide. As we get older, our arteries produce less nitric oxide, but the body has another way to produce it, from plants. Eat green veggies 6 times a day to keep your arteries bathed in nitric oxide. Sunshine also increases nitric oxide. So go get some sunshine, eat some greens. And then you know what, I'm going to tell you, you can do even better than what Esselstyn said. You can also minimize your dietary sodium, and then that'll also increase your nitric oxide. Okay? So anyways, there it is. You don't have to be fat, sick, and stupid. These common Western diseases are all preventable and relatively easy to prevent. Just eat low-fat, plant-based diet. Okay? So anyways, those are landmark papers that go show you why the low-fat vegan diet, I call it the low-fat fanatic diet, is great. It's wonderful and it dominates. This is also why the high-fat phonies are full of BS. Jeff Nelson over at VegSource has made a good video saying exactly what I'm saying, in a slightly different way, but it's the same main point. Anyways, I hope you found this helpful.